Okay, just a quick content warning before I begin. This talk includes mentions of violence and murder, so if you need to step out, now is the time. Get out, moonlight, the hate you give. What do they all have in common? Fantasy, sci-fi, thriller? Well, if you haven't been able to guess, they're all movies. Movies are an opportunity for film industry creatives to take the ideas that blossom in their minds and convert them into a medium that can be consumed by others. For an audience, movies are escapism. Movies are the opportunity to escape from your daily life and enter into a fictional world. Movies are escapism. But it's a form of escapism that's a privilege given to some and not all. Get out, moonlight, the hate you give. Once again, what do they all have in common? Strong black leads, something that's been missing from the industry since it first began. One last time, get out, moonlight, the hate you give. What do they all have in common? If you think about the plot of each film, you might notice an underlying pattern. A pattern that might sneak by you if you haven't experienced it before. That pattern is racial trauma. And that pattern is apparent in nearly every film with a black lead. Hello, my name is Kuicmar, and today I will be talking about the commodification of black trauma in film. In the past few decades, Hollywood film productions have made an effort to include more stories about racial minorities who were once excluded from the industry. The number of films including black leads has increased significantly. However, these films are often centered around some form of historical violence, such as slavery, civil rights era, or police brutality. Accurate depictions of the grim reality of Black history are important and necessary. But the issue lies within the oversaturation of these heavy and dark themes in Black films. The question is, when does representation become exploitation? Let's go through some examples. See You Yesterday, 2019, is a film about two Black teenage geniuses who invent a time machine, marketed as sci-fi and coming of age. Sounds cool, right? Well, at the beginning of the film, the main character's older brother is wrongfully murdered by police, and so the teenagers spend the entirety of the film going back in time trying to save the older brother. Therefore, audiences are made to watch the older brother be brutally murdered over and over again for the entire film. Queen and Slim, 2019, is a film about two Black characters going on a first date. Sounds romantic, right? Well, towards the end of their first date, as they're driving home, a cop pulls them over and tries to unjustifiably murder them. They manage to escape, but they spend the entirety of the film as fugitives, up until their inevitable death. Beats, 2019, is a film about a Black musical prodigy who makes beats. Sounds inspiring. At the beginning of the film, his older sister is shot and killed by gang members, right in front of him and right in the center of the screen. Marvel's Iron Heart is about a teenage genius who becomes Iron Man's successor. However, the alias of her name, Ironheart, comes from the fact that her best friend was shot in the heart during a drive-by shooting when they were having a picnic. They were 13 years old. All of these movies are marketed as sci-fi, fun, fantasy, romance, all very diverse genres, and yet all of their plots are tangled in a web of violence, racism, and brutality. Even in a TV show like Abbott Elementary, a mockumentary-style sitcom about a Black teacher teaching at a Black elementary school, one of the critiques it received was its lack of violence. People were baffled that the director chose not to include episodes about gang affiliation or school shootings. People wanted violence in a TV show about children at an elementary school. Again, movies and TV are largely viewed as a form of escapism, an opportunity for audiences to immerse themselves in a fictional reality. As creative director of Film Club, I think I know a little bit about using films for escapism. Growing up, I loved movies. They were so fascinating to me, and I loved seeing myself being represented on the screen. Movies, to me, were a form of comfort. Historically, movies have always been used as a form of comfort. In the past, whenever there was political turmoil or the anticipation of a war, films were released deliberately to distract the masses from the violence occurring and comfort them. For example, World War I had Alice in Wonderland. World War II had Fantasia, Pinocchio, The Philadelphia Story. The Great Depression had Frankenstein, King Kong, and The Wizard of Oz. These films were well made and well loved because of the comfort that it offered away from the violence occurring in reality. These movies were an escape. Again, movies and film are a form of escapism that isn't provided to everybody. During the 2020 police brutality protests, images and videos of dead and abused Black people were on all corners of the internet. If Black people wanted to escape the violence happening in reality, they didn't have the ability to, because our representative films were depicting that exact same violence. Therefore, Black people were made to watch themselves be brutalized in reality and in fiction simultaneously. There is a deal being made here. You can have your coming-of-age films, but somebody has to be wrongfully murdered. You can have your fantasy films with magic and dragons, but we're not getting rid of racism. That's going to be impossible. You can be the main character in a film, but we will always remind you of your place in society. With that message, there is a pattern, and that pattern is Black films are not worth making unless violence is involved. And in that pattern, that is exploitation. We are taking the stories of Black people, turning them into films under the guise of representation, when in reality, these films are just depictions of violence against Black people for entertainment. Pre-civil rights era, the lynching and murdering of Black people was a common form of entertainment. People would bring their children to the hanging location, they would bring snacks, and by the end of it, they would take photos and turn them into postcards to memorialize the experience. The exploitation of Black people and the violence against them has always occurred, but now it's just in a different form. The oversaturation of violence against Black people in film leads to a general desensitization when it happens in reality. As a forensic biology student, we learn about something called secondary traumatic stress syndrome. It's the disorder in which an individual develops PTSD-like symptoms after experiencing trauma from a secondary source. This sort can be videos or pictures, or even just hearing about it from somebody else, like a therapist would. It can be argued that the historical lynchings of Black people is nowhere near equivalent to characters dying in a movie, because they're just characters. Movies aren't real. But if these films are having lasting psychological effects on their audience, to the point where audiences can't even engage without feeling PTSD or anxiety because of the cycle of violence, then it can be argued that the impact is real, even if it comes from a fictional source, such as the film. Films about historical violence like slavery, Selma, 12 Years a Slave, Hidden Figures, they're all essential because they portray the accurate history that our ancestors, our relatives, and even ourselves have been through. Hollywood shouldn't stop making films about the very real violence that Black people are subjected to. However, overcoming racism and violence shouldn't be our only representation. Black people deserve wholesome films. We deserve films about awkward teenage girls wanting to go to prom, or cliche holiday Hallmark films that nobody's actually going to watch, or even cringy but iconic cult classics about vampires and werewolves, without all of the added trauma. No matter how progressive Hollywood may seem, this issue is systemic. It doesn't just affect Black audiences or Black people. It affects all racial minorities, because Hollywood has always stuck to stereotypes, and those stereotypes are leaving lasting psychological effects on its audience and on society. And the best way to combat that is to create films that divert those stereotypes. So, how do we take action and get those films made? As a volunteer researcher at the Canadian Cultural Mosaic Foundation, I found that the best way to enact change is through spreading awareness or showing support. Supporting your local up-and-coming filmmakers or directors, because there is no supply without demand. Directors like Sam Bailey, Quinta Brunson, Blitz Bazawule, or films like Soul, Aquila and the Bee, Sylvie's Love, and Black Panther are all examples of films where Black people can just be people. By supporting these films through monetary support or articles or word of mouth, we're demonstrating that there is an audience, that these ideas are tangible, and that a change can be made. Black people, like other demographics, live intricate lives with complex experiences. We are not a monolith. We are not just figures of trauma. We are people, and we deserve films that represent us as people. My name is Kuicmar Phot. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk.